Welcome to the Careers by Jen podcast, episode 174. In this episode of the podcast, Jen talks with Belcak, who helps people find jobs without connections, experience, or applying online. This could be the big break I've been waiting for, since I don't know anyone, have never done anything, and don't even know how to turn on a computer. It should only take a matter of minutes for Austin to find me the best job in the world.
You're listening to the Careers by Jen podcast with me, Jen Swanson, the podcast that helps you to get the job, love your work, and advance your career. Ever dreamed of working somewhere like Google or Microsoft or Apple or Amazon? Have you dismissed the idea because, well, it just seems like it would be impossible, or at best extremely difficult to even get an interview at a company like that? Well, hold on, because today's guest might just change your mind. Belcak is the founder of Cultivated Culture, where he helps people leverage unconventional strategies to land jobs that they love without connections, without traditional experience, and without applying online. His strategies have been featured in places like Forbes, Business Insider, and Fast Company, and he has helped people to get hired at Google, at Apple, at Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, and more. Austin is going to let us in on how and what you need to do to make your dream a very real possibility.
Are you procrastinating? Do you want to start a job search but aren't quite sure where to begin? Is it all just a little overwhelming? At Careers by Jen, we have a 5-day Jumpstart Your Job Search Challenge to help you get unstuck and move toward finding your dream job. Every day for 5 days, you'll receive an email to your inbox that asks you to complete one task. Every task you complete moves you closer toward your goal. The best part about this challenge is that it's absolutely free. Come over to careersbyjen.com and you'll see the 5-day Jumpstart Your Job Search Challenge on the right-hand side of the screen. Click on the image of Jen, sign up with your email address, and you'll be 5 days closer to reaching your goal. Why wait when you can get busy? Visit careersbyjen.com after this podcast.
So Austin, welcome to Careers by Jen. Thanks for being with us today.
Jen, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Before we get into our topic today, which is unconventional ways to apply for amazing jobs, tell me and tell our listeners a little bit about your story. How did you come to be doing what you're doing now over at cultivatedculture.com and all the things that you're doing?
Definitely. And I think the best place to start is what's going on right now. So I currently work full-time at Microsoft. I work in advertising and sales for them. But on the side, as you mentioned, I have my site, cultivatedculture.com. And the goal with that is to teach people how to leverage unconventional strategies to land jobs they love without having prior connections at the companies, without having any traditional experience, and without applying online, which is, I think, the most important one. And so it's been great. I started about 2 years ago. I do it on the side of my full-time job, and we've had a ton of people come through the community, leverage the strategies, and end up landing jobs at places like Google and Facebook and Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, and also across industries outside of tech. So it's been really fun to help those people. It's been really fun to connect with people like yourself. But things weren't always this way, to kind of answer your question. So I think the second best place to go now is way back to the beginning. So I went to university here in the United States. I went to a place called Wake Forest down in North Carolina. And I had grand ambitions to become a doctor, I think, as many of us do at some point in our lives. So in my high school experience, I tried to tailor towards pre-med. I actually centered my college search around pre-med programs that I could get into. I got into Wake. I accepted. I was so excited. I showed up for my first semester and I promptly failed chemistry, and then I failed French the next semester. So it wasn't a great start for the future Dr. Austin over here. My parents were not happy, needless to say. And then I went and joined a fraternity, which didn't help my case either.
Oh, why not?
And that was the beginning of the end. So I had a choice. I could try to pivot in college, or I could enjoy the free beer at the parties and the friends and the social life. And I chose the latter. I didn't worry about my career or anything like that. And senior year rolled around, and I interned at a company where my roommate's dad had gotten me the internship. It was in medical device sales. It was for Johnson & Johnson subsidiary, and they offered me a job at the end of the summer, and I accepted it. I didn't worry about the salary. I didn't worry about anything else. I said, the best thing that I can think of right now is having a job going into senior year so I can slack off like I've never slacked off before. And that's exactly what I did. Meanwhile, all my friends were out there preparing for interviews, tweaking their resumes, going on sites, meeting with different companies, doing all the things that you're supposed to be doing. So graduation rolled around, and I ended up graduating with a pretty terrible GPA. I still got my degree, and I started at this company. And then all the problems of the real world that I had kind of been neglecting for 3 years kind of hit me in the face. So my boss treated me terribly. Nothing that I did was good enough. He kept telling me I didn't have a future in the business, and was pretty degrading in general. I wasn't making any money. I was making like less than half of what my friends were making at other companies. I racked up a bunch of credit card debt because of that, just trying to make ends meet, honestly. And I was pretty miserable. So I thought to myself, this isn't for me. I have to make a change. And here in the US, we like to spend lots of money on our college educations. And so I thought, I spent in my case, I was very lucky. My parents were able to pay my way through college, but I got this degree. I spent 4 years. They spent the dollars. And I thought, that should afford me an opportunity somewhere new, a fresh start. So about 2 months into my first job, I started applying elsewhere, and I applied to hundreds of companies within the first month. I started at the top. I was like, I'll go right for the jugular. I applied to Google. I applied to Apple. And I think they have some sort of special system for people like me where the rejection letter like hits your inbox before your application is fully processed. Because I've never been told no faster. And so I scaled it down from them. I tried mid-tier startups in tech. Then I tried early stage, infancy stage startups. And then at some point I just started applying to anything that had like tech written on their website somewhere. So I was applying to 10 jobs a day in my prime, if you will. And I wasn't hearing back from any of them. And then when I did hear back when I did get an interview through like a family referral or somebody in my very tiny network at the time, I was consistently told that I didn't have enough experience because apparently, 3 months of professional experience in a biology degree don't count for much when you're trying to switch into tech or another industry. So that was the position I was in, and I was really stuck. It was really, really tough for me because I did everything I was supposed to do. Right, I went to college, and now when I started my job search, I asked family, I asked friends, I asked counselors at Wake Forest, how do I approach this? And the response was the same from all of them. It was, tweak your resume, tweak your cover letter, come up with some good answers for your applications, and then just apply for as many jobs as you can because it's a numbers game. Like eventually something will stick. And then when I said, well, nothing stuck, guys, and it's been a while, I was told to continue, like, do it again, start over, start fresh, maybe change something. And I thought to myself, there has to be a better way to do this. And at that time, I got this piece of advice much later. It actually came from my fiance, and it really resonated with where I was and what I went through. But she said, you should only take advice from people who already have what you want. And so I pivoted the way that I went about approaching these jobs. I stopped applying to 10 jobs a day, and I went out and I found people who met specific criteria. So I wrote out exactly what I wanted for my dream job, which was to be living in a major city like a New York or a San Fran or a Vancouver, something of that nature, to be working at a major tech company like a Google or a Microsoft, to be making a six-figure salary or greater, and then finally to be doing all of this under the age of 26 because I didn't want to wait until I was 40 for all of this to come to fruition. And so I went out and I used LinkedIn, again, fantastic tool, to find people who met those criteria. And then I reached out to them and I had a conversation with them and I asked them all these questions about their path and how they made it happen and what they would recommend for somebody in my position who is trying to get to where they are. And I learned a lot from those conversations. But the main two things I learned was that if you want a job at some of these amazing companies, you're probably going to need a referral. Realistically, that's the best way to make it happen. And then on top of that, you're going to need to find a way to prove out your value that doesn't just exist within the realms of a resume or a cover letter or application questions. Like you need to find a way to go above and beyond. And both of those things really, really resonated with me. So I then needed to figure out, okay, I need a referral, but my best friend hasn't been waiting at Google for months, waiting for me to come to this realization. So the next question was, how do I get a referral when I don't know anybody at these companies? And this is sort of how my job search strategy was born. And we can talk about that in a little bit. But to kind of to wrap up the story, I came up with this system that kind of allowed me to pick and choose where I interviewed. So rather than settling for a job or waiting for a company to choose me, I figured out a way to allow myself to kind of select and really boost my chances to land an interview at specific companies that I wanted. And by the end of it, I'd interviewed and landed offers at places like Twitter and Microsoft and Google. And so I accepted the job at Microsoft. I got a nice salary bump of about 500% actually over what I was making out of college. And then people started asking me, how did you do this? So I wrote a big post that you can find on my site that basically walks through all of this. And that resonated with people. And so Cultivated Culture was kind of born, and here we are.
That's an amazing story. And so while you were doing this, did you know you were doing it, or were you doing it accidentally, or how was there a process? Were you very strategic?
So that's a great question. I definitely did not have this idea to start a business, and I was keeping track of everything for that down the road. But I like to find ways to game the system, if you will, or find the road less traveled, because every system has a third door. So somebody, another entrepreneur out there had a nice quote where he basically said that success and business are kind of like a nightclub. So there's three entrances. There's the line that, all the common people, everybody trying to get in, they wait in that line, 99% of people. Then there's the line for the VIPs, the royalty, the billionaires, the tech moguls. They all walk through the VIP. But then there's the third door, which is the door where you have to kind of hop out of the main line and run down the alley and jump over the dumpster and crack open the window and run through the kitchen and then hope you made it in without anybody noticing. And that really resonated with me because that's exactly how I approach this. And so I am a very data-driven person. I really like when stuff is backed by some sort of research, be it some research that somebody else did or research that I've kind of conducted on my own. And so definitely as I was going through the process, I did keep track of what worked, what didn't work, and I tried to A/B test different strategies. And luckily I kept dozens. I used Evernote at the time, and I had pages on pages of all these crazy ideas and what worked and what didn't. And so when I did decide when people started asking me about this and I wrote the article, I had a lot of material to reference, and that was a nice starting point. And what's been fantastic about Cultivated Culture is now I have hundreds of people coming through every month where I get to continue to test these strategies. And it's not just on my personal experience. It's, what works across the board. And so things have shifted a little bit in the strategies that I recommend, which has been great because it means that I'm always learning, and the hiring process on the professional world is always changing. So it's nice. It's a great way to keep up with it and make sure that stuff actually works and I can still say it's proven.
That's right. And it used to be that it was the way you did it was to send out, dozens of resumes a day, and then just wait for that phone to ring. Or the email to ping or whatever, but that just doesn't even work anymore. And I don't know why people are suggesting that, but they are still.
Yep. And it's crazy. If you look at the data behind it, so LinkedIn did a survey on talent trends last year, and they basically found that 1 in 3 people are actively looking for new work. So in the US here, the active employed population is like 120 million people. So you got 40 million other people out there who are all looking for a job, but 75% of those people apply for jobs online. And that's not even the craziest part. So like, it's crazy enough that so many people are still trying this strategy that most of us will agree doesn't work most of the time. But on top of that, the Wall Street Journal also did a little bit of research of their own, and they published these survey results, which basically stated that only 20% of available jobs are posted online. So 80% of the jobs are filled via word of mouth or referral. And a lot of the times the postings for those roles, if anybody listening has ever applied for a job and the company comes back and says, sorry, we've already filled that role. And you're like, but it was posted 3 days ago. Like how? That's why, because they had somebody in mind that candidate was already waiting in the wings. And so when I found those pieces, that data, that really was a light bulb moment for me, because you have 75% of people applying for only 20% of the openings. And so if you could find a way to land a referral from somebody, your chances opened up, because now you're only competing against 20% of the applicants out there, but you're going after 80% of the available jobs. And that realization completely changed the game for me.
So before we get into exact steps, we have to go to a break. But when we come back, I want to ask you about where to start rather than papering the town with your resume. What is the first thing to do? So we'll be back in just a moment. Do you want someone to listen? Do you need help setting goals for yourself? Do you want someone to keep you accountable for your progress and to ask good questions that will help to move you toward your success? Have you got a resume that you want reviewed or updated? Do you need help deciding what kind of work you'd like to transition into? If any of these sound like you, I've got some coaching spaces open at Careers by Jen, and I would be happy to work with you to achieve your goals. From a single session resume review to multi-session career or life coaching, there are several packages to choose from. Go to careersbyjen.com, click on online programs, and you will see the coaching packages on the courses page. Select your package and let's get started on your future today. Okay, so we're back with Austin Belcak from cultivatedculture.com. Austin, what do you do first in your program?
That is a great question, Jen. And I'm going to outline a bunch of the steps here. If people are interested, I do have a free course called Jumpstart Your Job Search. I think you actually may have something similar.
I have a course called that too.
So mine is probably not nearly as wonderful as yours. But if people are interested, basically what it does is it walks through. It gives you all of everything that I'm about to describe. There are video modules that will show you exactly how to go through everything step by step, word for word scripts, templates, all that. There's no guesswork. And basically the idea is to help you find 10 contacts and build relationships with them at your dream company so that you can be referred in. So basically everything we're talking about here, you can find that course at cultivatedculture.com/Jen. So for anybody who's interested, that is available. But when we're thinking about the first step, the absolute first thing that you want to be doing, that is finding people who could potentially influence the hiring decision for the role that you want. So a lot of times people will come to me and they say, hey, I've been reaching out to recruiters, but I haven't heard anything. And I think a big mistake people make is that just because you reach out to somebody doesn't mean that that person is in a position to help you. So right off the bat, recruiters are kind of like the human version of an online job posting or application. Like their inbox is flooded because they are the most obvious choice. Like it feels good to reach out to a recruiter because you're reaching out to someone, but that person everybody else is thinking the same thing. So what we really want to find here is somebody who's going to be able to influence the actual hiring decision. They'll be able to get you in the door, but when it comes time to select between those top 2 or 3 candidates, that person is going to make that decision. And so the best way to do that is to understand what kind of role you want and what company has that role. And if you're, looking for a specific geography, that's great too. The more specific you can get about the role, the better. And then you're going to want to head over to LinkedIn and you're going to want to punch all that stuff in. So for the sake of example, let's say that I want to be an account manager in the technology vertical at Google. I'll go punch into LinkedIn account manager, Google technology. And then for me personally, I wanted to be in New York. So maybe we'll add New York at the end. And LinkedIn's going to pull up a list of everybody who's already in that position. And those are your leads right off the bat. Those are some of the contacts that you can reach out to. Now, sometimes it's helpful to look at individual profiles and see if, maybe there's points of commonality. Maybe you have a mutual connection. Maybe you went to the same college. Maybe they went to a college that's in your same sports conference, or literally anything that you can kind of latch onto. That's a great place to start. And I like to save these in a spreadsheet. So I'll have their name, I'll have their company, their title, their email, and I'll talk about how to get their email in a sec. I'll put in any notes that we have. And then I have a little bit of a tracker. So what I like to do if the opportunity presents itself, so basically if somebody is active on social media in a professional way, I like to warm them up. That's what I like to call it. So we can quote unquote warm them up. And basically what that means is interacting with them, engaging with them. So if they're posting on social in a professional way, not like go like their Facebook pictures or whatever from their trip to the Bahamas, but if they're sharing an industry article, if they're commenting on something professional on LinkedIn or Twitter, or maybe they have a personal site, leave a comment or like one of their posts, and just do that every other day or every 3 days. And what that does is when you do reach out to the person, you're not an unknown quantity then. You're now, Jen or Austin, who has been engaging with my posts, which I really appreciate because I like when people like my stuff and drop a comment. So that's really going to help improve your response rate. Again, some people aren't as active on these professional sites, and that's okay. But if that opportunity is there, definitely take advantage of it. Then the next thing you want to do when you do think about reaching out is finding their email. So there's a couple of tools for this. The two that I recommend are hunter.io and then Voila Norbert, so Voila Norbert.com. And basically both of those tools are email lookup tools. They're free up to a certain number. I think there's plenty in there, so you shouldn't have to pay unless you're really getting crazy. But basically, you can pop in their name, pop in their company URL. So if you're looking for me, you could type in Austin Belcak, and then you could do Microsoft.com. And that will pull up the corporate email address for pretty much anybody from the person who could get you hired to, Larry Page, to Tim Ferriss, to Tony Robbins. It's crazy who you can find. And so now you have their email, which is great. People always ask me, how should I reach out? Some people reach out via LinkedIn. Some people do social media. I personally have found email is the best because response rates are highest, but it's also very easy to track. So the other thing I recommend is using an email tracker. There's a bunch of these out there. The one that I personally use is called Yesware, Yesware. HubSpot has a free one. So if you Google HubSpot email tracking, you'll be able to find the free one. It's a Chrome extension. It's super easy to use. But basically what those do is they tell you when, where, and how often people have opened your email, which is creepy, kind of, but very, very helpful. Oh, it's and you can see what device and like what time and so now my friends give me flack because they know that like I recommend that, and so they send me an email and they're like, "You're tracking this, aren't you?" I mean, I don't mean to be, but I am. And then I'll hit them up and be like, "Jack, I know that you haven't responded to my email, but I know you've opened it, so like, come on, bud." But it's very helpful because you can gauge interest. So when you do send out your communication, you can see, if somebody opens it once and never again, you can assume that, they're probably not interested. But a lot of people are busy. And one of the biggest mistakes people make is not following up simply because, they feel like they sent the email and they did their part. And so now like they wonder, why didn't I get a response? Did I do something wrong? Does this person not like me? Did I annoy them? But in reality, like we all get tons of email every day. And typically an email from a stranger is going to be very low on your priority list. So the email tracker lets us gauge interest. If somebody's opening your email multiple times across multiple days, then my rule of thumb is as long as that is happening, continue to follow up. And I've personally followed up 10, 12 times with some people before I got a response that actually led to an interview. So don't be afraid to be persistent. You just have to do that in the right way. But the most important thing is the initial outreach. So I have some email templates on my site. So if you head over there, there's an article called How to Get a Job Anywhere with No Connections. And in that article, there's a bunch of templates that you can use. You can just copy and paste and kind of swap out the info to fit what you need. But the main gist that I think it's important for people to understand here is that a lot of folks, when they reach out about the job search, they focus on themselves. So they reach out to you, Jen, and they say, Jen, if you're a hiring manager, let's say we're going for that account manager position at Google, you're an account manager at Google, and I reach out to you and I say, Jen, please take a look at my resume and see if it would be a good fit for your team. Or, Jen, I love what you're doing. I want to be a part of your team. Can we have a conversation to talk about how my skills might be a good fit for your team? All of this stuff is centered on you. It's me. And again, you're already a low priority in this person's inbox. They don't know you, and therefore, to be honest, they don't really care about you. But what they do care about is themselves. So there's a really interesting study that came out. It was actually done at Harvard, but basically people found that when we talk about ourselves or when we think about ourselves, the pleasure centers in our brain light up, the same ones that light up when you're eating an amazing meal, or even when the thing that they referenced was when you're high on cocaine. But regardless of what pleasurable activity you're doing, there are certain centers in your brain that light up that reinforce the behavior. And so that's what they found. When people are talking about themselves, they're talking about personal stuff, or they're thinking about personal stuff, those pleasure centers light up. And so when you shift the conversation to focus on the person that you're emailing, that comes into play. And that's going to do a lot to improve your response rate. So I actually typically don't recommend that you focus on the job at all when you reach out, but instead focus on the person and their needs. So tell them that their experience stood out to you. You've been looking at tons of profiles on LinkedIn and their experience stood out. It was really cool how they made the transition from X to Y. And you'd love to learn a little bit more about that. Like, you'd love to hear more about their story and what they've accomplished and how they've become so successful within their industry, within their role. And if they have a few minutes to chat, you'd really appreciate it. But their time is valuable, so if not, it's totally fine. It's important to give people an out as well. And so I'd send an email that kind of includes all of those pieces. And then again, I would follow that. I would try to follow that follow-up formula, lots of follows there, but that we mentioned with email tracker. So if people didn't respond right away, I'd follow up. And typically what you can do is if you need to follow up, the first time you can just mention, hey, I know we're all busy. I know your time is super valuable. If this is like something that you'd be up to do, I'd really appreciate it. And then you can kind of continue it from there. But typically what's going to happen is you'll be able to land some conversations with these people. I think you'd be surprised. I was certainly surprised when I started this at how many people were actually willing to help if I put myself out there. So I think that is a very long-winded step one.
That's okay, but that's good because I know I'm super busy and my inbox is embarrassingly large. And I appreciate if somebody has sent me an email, a stranger. I get asked all the time about people coming onto the show. Mm-hmm. I get promoters sending me people to come onto the show. And a lot of times, if I don't know the name, I don't know, it's another request. There'll be 15 other things with my other work that I have to get done. Mm-hmm. And that email will get lost down in the bottom of the abyss. And, it'll be a couple days later or maybe the next week. And then I'll get another email from that person saying the same thing. I know you're busy, sorry if you're interested. And I appreciate that just because I will have forgotten probably about this person unless I made a note of it somewhere and have not gotten back down to that part of the inbox. And so it is a useful thing to follow up because it's not that I don't care. It's not that I'm not interested because sometimes they're amazing guests. It's just that I have so much going on. I don't have time to pay that much attention at the beginning and then I forget about it.
Yep, absolutely.
It's human nature, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Good. So that's step one. What's the next thing that you do?
So The next step, and I think the best thing to do is probably I guess we could do 3 steps, but the next 2 should be shorter. So step 2 is to have the conversation with this person. And there's a lot of things that we could dissect about how to have the conversation. But I think there's 2 really important points to keep in mind. So the first is when you have the conversation, you want it to be natural. So you don't just want to roll in there and again, make it all about you. Like, hey, great. Thanks for telling me about your experience, but I'm looking for a job. I've done this. I've done that. Can you pass my resume along? Blah, blah, blah. Just because somebody has taken the time to speak with you doesn't mean that they are automatically going to refer you into the job. In fact, it's the opposite. So you still want to make the conversation about them. And to tie that in with our second goal, our second goal is to figure out some sort of angle where we can add value, be it a challenge that person is facing or their team is facing. Maybe there's a new initiative coming up, or maybe they have a personal goal they're trying to achieve that you can help with. So you want to combine those 2. You want to tease out as much information as you possibly can while keeping the conversation natural. You don't just want to pepper them with questions. And this is something that's definitely a little bit more of an art than a science. And this, I definitely recommend that people try to have as many of these conversations as they can, because the more conversations you have, the better you'll get, the more comfortable you'll be. You'll figure out what works and what doesn't. And there's really no substitute for actually getting out there and having the conversation. So you show up, you have the conversation, and then you try and figure out, again, ask them, what's the biggest challenge that your team is facing right now or that you're facing right now? And what have you done to solve it? And make sure to ask follow-ups. Like if they're open about the challenge or the initiative, don't just stop after the first piece of information they give you. Dig in, like try to ask some follow-up questions, get creative, and try and get as much information as you possibly can, because that's what's going to allow you to take the next step, step 3, which is adding value to them in a way that will kind of push them towards referring you to the job. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But the other thing that people might run into, this conversation can go one of 2 ways. Somebody could just go, oh, I'm so glad you asked what my challenge is. Here is everything. Or they may be like, well, our challenge is, getting more customers. And that's fairly general, and that's pretty hard to act against. So my point is sometimes you're not going to be able to get all the information you need, and you're going to have to source it elsewhere. And Jen, when we did our interview, you brought up a fantastic point of researching the company ahead of time. And this really comes into play here. So what you can do is if this person doesn't give you everything you need, you can go back and try and find an angle of your own. And one of my favorite ways to do this is by talking to the company's customers. So for example, there's a whole bunch of real world examples. So I guess we'll use one here. But there was somebody in my community. She was a student and she wanted to work for Airbnb. She had applied online, hadn't heard anything. She'd sent emails to all these people that worked there, hadn't heard anything. And she was feeling frustrated. So she went and she talked to people who used Airbnb. And she sent out a survey to them and she sourced information like, what frustrates you the most about Airbnb? What do you wish they did better? And then she went to social media and she actually found people who were saying the same thing. And she took some screen caps of those. And then she included the data from her survey and the screen caps from social media in a nice deck and said, listen, Airbnb, this is a problem that your customers are having and they want a solution. And then she went ahead and built out 2 solutions for them. And so that's a nice segue into step 3. But my point here is that when we're gathering information, it's great if it comes from the contact, but they're not always going to be an open book. So sometimes you have to source it yourself, and that's where the research piece comes in. So that's kind of step 2, having the conversation, teasing out that information, figuring out an angle that you can then go after. And that takes us to step 3, which is basically crafting what I like to call a value validation project. And so essentially what that is some sort of deliverable that validates your value ahead of time. So if we think about why companies hire, the end goal for every company is to pay somebody a certain amount of money in hopes that they will bring as much money back to the company as possible. So if we think strictly in terms of the revenue goals for companies, which is what most companies are truly based on at their core, the best hire for a company is somebody who will bring in like the most dollars out of all the candidates that are applying for a job, that most dollars to the company's bottom line. So if we can prove out that we're that person, that puts us in a really good position. On top of that, everybody else who's applying online, or maybe if referred in another way, who isn't doing this, they're relying on their cover letter and their resume and their application answers to prove out that value. And again, another great point that you made, Jen, is it's very hard to showcase personality. And it's also very hard to showcase like the value that you bring to the table in a couple 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper with black and white ink, right? It's much easier to showcase your value if you actually go out and do something valuable. So that's our goal here. Whatever challenge that person gives you, or a new initiative that's coming up, try to find a way to create something that adds value to them. For me personally, and it's different for everybody. If you're a web developer, maybe you build out something. If you're a salesperson, there's a guy named Tristan who he used to work at Foursquare, and he got that job there because Foursquare, back when Foursquare was like a thing that people used.
Right. I was going to say it's still around.
RIP. Yeah. Like is it Thursday? Tomorrow, Throwback Thursday. But yeah, so back when they were a thing, he said he saw the data sales position open. And so what he did was he actually went out to companies who would be a good fit for their advertising platform. And he positioned himself as a supporter of Airbnb. And he sourced 10 leads. And then he emailed the CEO of Airbnb and said, you have a sales position open. I want it. And here are 10 companies that I went out and sourced who are ready to start advertising with you tomorrow. And no surprise, he ended up getting that job. And so that's one example. Another, Airbnb, for some reason, after I've created my business, I realized that super creative job seekers go to Airbnb. But there was another girl who wanted to work for Airbnb, and she was from the Middle East, and she realized that Airbnb wasn't in the Middle East and there was a big opportunity there. So she actually mocked up an exact replica of Airbnb's site, but then she swapped in these Middle Eastern what am I looking for? Apartments or hotel rooms, amenities,
Yeah.
Exactly. And she popped them in there. And then throughout the site, she had like basically a resume, her experience, what she brought to the table, et cetera. And she sent it to Airbnb, and she actually tweeted at them, and the CEO of Airbnb actually responded to her, and she ended up getting that job. And people have gotten insanely creative. Like people have used Facebook ads to specifically target, like we talked about, the folks who have the most influence over your role, like account managers at Google in the example I brought up before, or whatever it may be. People have used Facebook ads to target those people and send them to a landing page, which is basically their resume, and they've gotten hired that way. So my point is that there are crazy amounts of ways to add value here. For me personally, building decks was the easiest. I bought like a $12 PowerPoint template online, which looks amazing. And then all of my ideas, I would just consolidate into that deck, and then I would send it back to them. So that's basically step 3. Figuring out where you can add value, figuring out what sort of deliverable you can build out that conveys your message, conveys your value best, and then putting that together. And then what you're going to do is you're going to follow up with your contact, and you're basically going to say, hey, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. It was amazing to hear about your story, and I really enjoyed our conversation, especially the piece about, insert challenge here or insert initiative here. And then you can say, I've thought a lot about that over the past couple of weeks, and I actually put together some solutions based off of my personal experience when I've run into this problem, and I'd love to get your feedback on it. And then you just send that off. And typically what will happen is if your solutions are on point and up to spec, that person will say, wow, this is pretty awesome, pretty great. We hadn't thought about these, or we hadn't tried that one thing or whatever. And they'll pass it around to the team and potentially come back to you and say, hey, we actually have a job opening. Would you like one? Or would you like it? Or, hey, we don't have a job opening, but this is amazing and we need you on our team, so we're going to create one for you. I've seen that happen as well. Sometimes, occasionally, they're not just going to be all open arms again, continuing the theme there. And so you have to give them a little nudge. So typically what I recommend in that situation is to wait a couple weeks, maybe send them one follow-up or two in between, just anything that you glean from the conversation. Again, if they have personal goals, or you knew they were going on a trip, or you talked about something and you found an article to send them. But then a couple weeks down the road, send them an email and just say, hey, by the way, there's been some changes at my current company or with my current role, and now I'm looking for new opportunities. If you know of anything that would be a good fit, please let me know. And so again, we're not asking them like, hey, you have a job and I want it, but we're planting the seed that we're now considering other opportunities. And if those solutions that you provided were up to par, they're not going to want to let you go anywhere else. Even other teams within their company, they're going to want you on their team. And that can kind of force their hand and force them to, come back with that communication. So I've seen that work really well too. But that is basically the 3-step process to going from knowing absolutely nobody at your dream company to building those relationships and then adding the value that will help you stand out from all the other applicants and help you get referred in by somebody who can actually influence the hiring decision once it comes down to picking between a couple of candidates.
Now, for somebody listening, they might think, wow, this would take a ton of time. And I know that it also takes a ton of time to tweak 100 resumes and send them out to different places. And so this is much more of a pointed strategy. How much, if you only had a limited amount of time, one of these one of these 3-step procedures would take, how much time do you think? I guess it would depend.
Yeah, and that's a great question. So the whole point of this strategy is to focus on quality over quantity. You mentioned tweaking 100 resumes, and the last thing I ever recommend for anybody, and the people in my community, the people listening, is to try and apply this strategy to like 20 jobs, 30 jobs, 100 jobs.
Exactly.
Yeah, where this really excels is if you know what you want. And I always tell people, like, don't settle. Like, shoot for the moon with your job. If you want to work at Google, or you want to work at Apple or Tesla or SpaceX or whatever, like, that is your goal. Find 5 companies or 3 companies and really go after those companies hard. So if we're talking a timeline here, I also have a course as well, and I basically bill it as 10 weeks to your dream job, and that's typically the turnaround. If people can really get after it, implement everything to a T, knock out the work. Basically, what you would do is you would spend the first week kind of finding those contacts, consolidating the list, and then beginning to reach out to them. Maybe for me, I think if you're not used to sending cold emails, maybe start small, send 1 or 2 a day, see what happens, kind of tweak things as you go along. For me, once I'd gotten used to this, I was sending out 5 to 10 emails a day. But I actually recommend that you reach out to, if you really want to see true success, I actually recommend reaching out to around 100 contacts. So that could be 20 contacts at each company. If you're doing 5 companies, that could be 10 contacts at 10 companies. But 100 emails really maximizes the chances that you're going to find somebody who you really connect with and who's going to be an advocate for you. So that's the first week. The second week is just kind of continuing that, but beginning to set up those meetings. And as you have more of those meetings, you'll get better at them. You'll glean more information. And that's also what's great. If you reach out to 10 or 20 people at the same company, you can ask them the same questions and you'll get different answers from everyone. And you'll be able to take all of the pieces of the puzzle that you got from each person and kind of use them to really understand what's going on. And you can kind of pick and choose where you want to add that value. So I would say that that's week 2 or 3 is talking to those people, having those conversations. And then the rest of the time is really spent crafting the deliverable, and not like you shouldn't be spending 7 weeks on something. It should really be, once you get good at it, you should be able to turn it around in roughly a week, maybe 2 weeks, depending on how many opportunities you have in the pipeline. So typically the 10 weeks includes also the interview process, which is a little out of our control. We have to wait for the companies and all that. So typically I'd say that you can, if you are not doing something drastic like changing industries with no traditional experience in that industry, and this is more of, you have some of the experience, maybe you're not quite at like they want 6 years, you have 3 kind of thing, that's totally fine. You should be able to turn this around, at least to get the interview, in like 4, 5, 6 weeks or so if you're really working at it every day, allocating like an hour, 2, 3 every day to knock it out.
That's great. So it's more strategic and less widespread, more focused, and that would have to begin with knowing what you want.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Exactly. Well, Austin, you've given us a ton of value today. Can you tell people where to find you?
Definitely. So my website is cultivatedculture.com. You guys, anybody who's listening, can feel free to reach out to me. I read all my emails. I answer all my emails, and my email is austin@cultivatedculture.com. And then if anybody is interested in getting the exact steps and the word for word scripts and the formulas for the stuff I just talked about in terms of identifying those contacts, building the relationships, and landing the referral, I do have that Jumpstart Your Job course, which is totally free for anybody listening. You just have to go to cultivatedculture.com/Jen, Jenn, and you'll be able to access it. So if anybody has any questions, again, just let me know. I'm around. But Jen, thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you being here and your one last piece of advice for us.
My one last piece of advice would again be don't settle. If you want a job and you want to work for a company, don't let anybody tell you that you're not qualified or you'll never get there. Go for it. Use the strategies we just talked about. And if you need to bridge some gaps in experience or whatever, take some time outside of the office to do that. Take some courses, get out there and build something yourself, freelance, whatever it is that you need to do, and then go for it. Because we spend a ton of our lives at our job. I mean, if you do the math, 40 hours a week, 40 to 60 in some cases, if you're crazy like us Americans and you work too much.
Canadians too.
Yeah. Times 50 weeks in the year, times 35 years of your life. I mean, that is a ton of time to waste at a job that you settled for, you're not happy with. So don't settle. Start taking action now if you want to make a move on your career, and listen to more of the Careers by Jen podcast so you can make it happen faster.
Thank you. Austin Belcak, it's been a pleasure. And people go check him out at cultivatedculture.com.
Thanks so much, Jen.
You've been listening to Careers by Jen with Jen Swanson. If you like what you heard, please share this. You know, if every single person listening today shared this episode with just one friend, our audience would be twice as big just like that. And the more people we can help with our content, the better. So help out a friend and help grow our audience by sharing this show with someone you know who would benefit from the content. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, take good care.